Hey Dina, so imagine we're at a race, and I don't care what race is. Let's pick. Maybe it's a trail race, maybe it's a marathon trail race or whatever, something like that, right? So we're at a race, right? And we're there a couple days before, and we're like so excited, and we're hanging out, we're doing the expo, all this stuff, and we pick up our race packet, and oh my gosh, hey, there's actually an organized dinner the night before the race. You know how some of these races have, or in the past, it was a lot more prominent in the past, but they still have these organized dinners, these quote unquote pasta loading, let's just call it carbohydrate loading, dinners the night before. Like I used to jump on that bandwagon, by the way, but I will loop that into our episode today. But here's the thing. So, we're like, hey, races on Saturday, Friday night, we both go to this dinner. We just, stuff our faces with bread and pasta and just all this stuff. And we're like, oh, and we roll out of there and we're like, oh, we're going to have the best race ever tomorrow. And then, we toe the line on Saturday morning and we both look at each other and we're like, oh boy, how are you feeling? And we kind of give that face like, I don't know how I'm feeling. And then the gun goes off, boom, and we start running. Let me just say this. You would not want to be behind me on a single track trail after a carbohydrate loading dinner. Do you know why?
My imagination is going, well, first of all, I would have to be behind you because you're a faster runner, so I'm screwed because now we have this issue going on, which is like the air quality might be affected. Or
and
there
we're
are
not talking
noises.
about smog and pollution, although I guess it could be. But no, what are we talking about? We're talking about like serious GI things going on that, kind of get expelled and which is horrible when you're stuck behind someone, by the way. It really is.
Well, because you kind of want to sometimes laugh, but then you're like, oh no, I hope that isn't worse for that person.
Yeah,
or, you know
right.
what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
the toots can sometimes elevate or worsen or whatever fill in the blank verb we want to use there. And then odors and things.
Yes.
However, Bob, I'm also thinking this happened to me. It's happened to all of us, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Being the recipient or the giver, generator of these things that we're going to talk about today. But I remember, I think it was 2004 when I was doing road marathons and trying to qualify for Boston. It was a race where I was not a dietitian yet.
Yeah.
And did the pasta loading.
Oh.
It wasn't the race event, but I went to one of those pasta restaurants and loaded up on so much pasta and French bread. And I don't even know what else. I was so miserable for that race and totally gut bombed my way through that thing.
Gosh.
I know.
So did you give some presents to people along the way? Is that what you're saying?
I think I literally stopped several times to hurl over and let the cramps or try and get the I don't remember all the toots going on because that was probably such a trauma.
Right.
I suppressed all those memories.
Well, I've got a lot of those memories, and I'm not going to share them with the listeners because you guys all know my history with GI distress, and if you don't, you can listen to some past episodes on that. But, that's kind of what we're talking about today as we kind of loop into the whole, what are we doing in this episode? We're talking about FODMAPs. So some of you have probably heard of FODMAPs before, and what we're doing is we're relating that to GI distress because there is a direct correlation between low or high FODMAP diets and GI distress, gas, vomiting, bloating, all this great stuff, right? That we never, ever want to have. So let's just, let me actually just briefly tell you what this whole acronym means first, because you may have heard of FODMAP, or maybe you haven't, but it's just an acronym for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. I kind of feel like I'm in the South when I say that word, polyol. Anyway, so that's like the technical. That's actually what FODMAP stands for. But I feel like the reason we're talking about this because there is, we've said this before, 30 to 90% of endurance athletes have GI distress at some point in their training or racing, time or their career, and that's research. That's not us. I mean, this is published research. So the question is that we're going to answer today is, well, what is a FODMAP, high in FODMAP diet, and should you follow it, right? That's kind of what we're getting down to these days. So where should we start with this, Dee?
I think because you mentioned the acronym and what it stands for, I wonder, just talking a little bit more examples of what these foods are
Oh, that's a
or
great,
what
yeah, great idea.
happens for some people when they're ingesting these kinds of foods. Like, what's a
Yep.
polyol? What's a
Yep.
disac? Maybe just some real life examples of these foods, which everyone can Google, high FODMAP
Yeah.
food or low FODMAP food.
Yeah.
So maybe we head there.
And I was just going to add to that, like there are apps out there, there are free apps and paid apps, super
Yes.
useful. Like I actually use FODMAP diets with a lot of my athletes who have GI distress, and I mandate that they get these apps because it just makes your life so much easier. So instead of always Googling, if you're going down this road, I
True.
think it'd be very helpful to get one of those apps. But yeah, so what, I mean, FODMAPs, what they are, I mean, and you may have kind of deduce this by the names that I threw out with oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides. Those are carbohydrates, right? And they're specific carbohydrates with different chains of kind of linked together. So with oligosaccharides, those are more than one, obviously, or like many, right? And those are usually things like, I mean, we're talking about wheat, right? We're talking about onions, garlic, and those oligosaccharides are very complex. There's disaccharides, which di means two, right? So there's two different carbohydrate sources. So things like lactose is pretty easy to, and we can give examples here in a second. Monosaccharides are just one carbohydrate. And then let's just save the polyols really quick. We'll come back to that one. But
Okay.
do we need to talk about like specific foods about the oligo, di, and monosaccharides?
I mean, I just think generally the classes of foods, it is those gluten containing foods. But I mean, honestly, Bob, which is great, the apps,
Yeah.
the Monash University has a great
Yep.
app, but like it is a long list of
Oh my gosh.
foods that contain
It's,
these kinds of carbohydrates and alcohol as
yep.
well
Yep.
is in that. Some things are surprising, like some of the teas, like, oh, I thought it was just wheat bread, but honestly, it can be these kind of semi obscure, like, oh, I never thought about that food being a problem, or maybe with my gut health, that's a
Yeah.
problem.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. Yeah. And it's so, and that's, I was waving my head yes on that one because when I take athletes through this, it's hard. It is so hard
yeah,
because it is very elimination based, which it needs to be because we'll get into this, but we're trying to fix the gut. We're trying to kind of get the gut calmed down a little bit and not have any trigger foods that would trigger this GI distress. But yeah, it's tough to put things together. Like if you like a lot of variety in your nutrition, your daily nutrition, FODMAP is going to be a rough go around. But the good news,
yeah,
which we'll get to, is you don't have to do it that long, which is kind of
yeah.
nice. Yeah.
And do you want to say, Bob, too, like as you were mentioning in the beginning, GI distress, like that can manifest as bloating, the toots, or
Yep.
gas, or
Yep.
maybe worse, diarrhea, vomiting,
Yeah.
cramping, that kind of thing. But why do these foods, how do they contribute to that? Like, what's the deal
Yeah. Yeah.
in the gut?
So
Yeah.
yeah, these types of foods will draw water into the intestine, and that helps the fermentation process. Like, so we're fermenting bacteria, and that is what produces this pressure, this gas, this bloating. A lot of times, all the downstream things too, like diarrhea and like the toots, like you're mentioning too,
Yeah.
right? So it's because of just the movement of water into the intestine, and it's a tricky thing because and I'm sure you've had athletes like this too, D, where they're like, nothing's wrong, it's just, well, and then you start asking, well, do you usually have gas? Well, yeah. Well, that, like, gas throughout the day is normal, but
Yeah.
like when you're training and racing, if it's above a certain level, so to speak, like, wow, you're really noticing it, or someone behind you is really noticing it, or if it really smells foul or something like that that's different, then
Yeah.
that's not normal. And I feel like I just need to put that out there because a lot of athletes I've worked with just think that's their norm. Like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
when I eat this food, I have a little bit of cramping, but it always happens. It's fine. It's actually not fine. There's something going on,
Yeah.
right?
We
So
definitely want to take care of it somehow. So,
yeah,
which is kind of the point of this pod. I mean, there's a lot of issues here, Bob. So, part of it's like prior to a race or a big event, do we switch all of our daily nutrition to be low FODMAP, low in these kinds of carbohydrates or other
Yep.
foods, so that we're not having these symptoms? Will that guarantee that I'm GI distress free, or what is the
Yeah.
recommendation and protocols, things for our listeners to think about if they're kind of resonating with what we're saying?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, right? I kind of feel like we need to push the pause button really quick, D, because we forgot to mention polyols.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, so
polyols.
let's just go
Oh
back to
well.
that really quick. So just we'll come back to that. But polyols, we really need to bring this up because they are hidden in so many foods, and we're just talking mostly sugar alcohols here, right? So sorbitol, mannitol, and really most of them that have all OL attached to
Oh
the
yeah.
end.
Hmm.
But this is kind of what's interesting too, D, is I found this out, my wife found this out, unfortunately, is did you know that, and I had never heard of this sugar alcohol before, which is a polyol, it's called Persitol.
Mm.
And I'd never heard of it because we usually, it's
I
like
did not.
mannitol, erythritol, right? All that stuff. This is actually found in avocados. Interesting, right? So
Okay.
it was so funny because my wife and I have been together for a long, long, long time, and we used to always enjoy guacamole and avocados and all this stuff. And then one year, I can't remember when it was, she's like, "Oh my gosh, my stomach really hurts." And we did some detective work, and we found out that it was an avocado. And I'm like, "Why would an avocado do this?" So I'm looking it up. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, an avocado actually has a sugar alcohol in it." So I say that more just as a tip for our listeners. Like if you're feeling any type of intestinal cramping or bloating or gas after eating avocados, it's because it actually has polyols in it. So sorry.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. So I wanted to get to that. So, but keep in mind that these polyols, these sugar alcohols, are in a ton of products these days, aren't they? Because they're trying to reduce the sugar, so they're
Yeah.
adding sugar alcohols now. Oh,
It's one of those common culprits, I would say. Well, common when we think about it and are educated about it, but we don't know. For
yeah.
example, I think of all the zillion nutrition bars out there, Bob.
Oh
And
my
yeah, I'm
gosh.
traveling to this race and I'm going to
Yep.
pack my snacks and I'm all prepared.
Yep.
And then, oops, I'm having some digestive woes. Of course,
Yeah.
that could be from a number of things, but some of those bars
Yeah.
that taste like candy bars, like, oh, heck, it had sorbitol or even some sport nutrition products that we're not maybe paying attention to
Yeah.
have some of those sugar alcohols too.
And then
And
you
then
add
that,
insult to injury by going to the carbohydrate loading dinner, right? And you're
yes,
like, oh, that's just a bomb waiting to go off, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
So we want to be careful. So I think the big thing too is look for sugar alcohols. Look for anything that has OL and then in the last part of its name in your ingredients. But let's kind of go back to what you were saying about should athletes actually do this, right?
yeah,
Should they follow? I would probably venture to say most of us follow a moderate to high FODMAP diet right now for the most part, right? If
yeah,
you're including gluten in your diet, then you probably have a good amount of FODMAPs in your diet, right?
yeah, yeah,
So if my thing would be, well, if you don't have GI distress and you've never complained of it, then I don't think you really need to worry about it. Like why would you go through this, right? So that's
right,
probably check that first box. If never GI distress, move on. Like you, please still listen to our podcast or like this episode because you may help other people or family members, but you don't need to do this, right? This is
agreed.
literally only for those 30 to 90% of athletes who have some form of GI distress at some point. And maybe it's not even that common, D. Like I've seen this also that it comes and goes. I've seen athletes actually change their nutrition in the weeks leading up to a race for whatever reason, and then they kind of have these trigger foods that are introduced that actually set off GI distress when they don't have GI distress normally. So we just
Yeah,
have to be aware of what you're eating. But I think if we're both comfortable with saying, okay, the only reason you would do kind of follow a low FODMAP diet before training, events, races, whatever, is if you do have GI distress symptoms. Is that safe to say?
I would agree with that. I'm also thinking here of another expansion of the flow chart is like if you are having issues, okay, we could implement a low FODMAP dietary plan, the 2, 3, maybe longer days in advance of your race. However, could we get to the root issue
Yes.
in our gut health, which I know
Yes.
we've talked about in previous episodes. But as a short term, like, oh, heck, stuff's going on, this is a strategy we could implement for hopeful relief or prevention of some of these issues that occur.
Yeah, it's actually a good point. Like if you're feeling this the week before a race, that's the oh you know what moment. Yeah, that I think a few days of a low FODMAP diet would absolutely be beneficial. But to your point, what I was going to say is we actually need to try this months before in training to see how your body reacts to it first, right? Because there are certain trigger foods, and even not that we said this, but there are, low and moderate FODMAP foods. So when we start an athlete on a low FODMAP dietary plan, it's all low. Like it's all, if you're going to use an app, it's all green foods, right? Meaning green is good, green is okay. And then once you go through that for a couple of weeks, then we introduce some moderate, like usually like one moderate food at a time to see what because we're trying to figure out what food triggers there are. So my point is that you actually want to spend, if you have GI distress and this is falling in your category in your lap right now, you want to probably start in base training if you can and start to figure out which foods are your triggers, because some of them will be and some of them will not be. And that's where I think it's important to look at maybe 6 to 9 months before your race is to start not following a FODMAP diet, low FODMAP diet 100% all, for the entire 9 months, because that's hard. That's extreme. I would never ask anybody to do that. Like, but in the respect of trying to fix and heal your gut, we need to start that earlier than later. So I think there's kind of two approaches, right? Started early in training and then leave it for the week before the race if something wrong is going, like something happens.
Yeah. If we're not able to address something in the gut to resolve like the root issue, whether that's your microbial diversity or some other issue going on.
Yeah.
But that implementation, I think also, Bob, something to mention here is, I guess, two things I was just thinking of. The high FODMAP and removal of all these foods, it really isn't intended to be long term.
Not at all.
Because, again, we're trying to get to root cause or identify this one or, handful of problematic foods. Right. But if there is something deeper going on, more impactful in like clinically with our gut health, then get to a treatment plan for that. But the other thing, Bob, is just as athletes, like if we cut out these 100 foods, how are we going to get our calories? We have to be really strategic to plan and make sure we're, meeting our micronutrient needs, our macro needs, and so on. So I've seen a few athletes that cut these foods out for eternity. I'm like, the whole long list. And you look at what they're eating, and it's like, oh, wow, we have some concerns here. So
and I definitely wouldn't go it about alone, right? I would definitely, listeners, if you're thinking about doing this, get a good sport dietitian who knows what they're doing with this, because you want someone to guide you. Because like you're saying, Dia, at most, I keep an athlete on this for 4 weeks at most, but we're doing some intense work in those 4 weeks, because I don't want them to stay on it more than 4 weeks, because there's a lot of risks to it. Now, it's funny though when you say that, because I've worked with a lot of athletes and put them on low FODMAP diets for a few weeks, and they're like, oh my God, I feel so great. Like, why would I want to introduce a moderate FODMAP food and feel bad? Well, because we need to figure out how we move for the rest of your life, like what foods are going to work for you. So there is that point. Like, I get it. That's why athletes don't, they kind of stay on the low FODMAP, because they do. They feel so great. But when we talk about healing the gut, this is only one step in the process. It is not the only thing that you address, with just taking out high FODMAP foods.
Bob, the research or body of research in this area, like for athletes doing low FODMAP, and so remember, listeners, that's like the less fermentable kinds of carbohydrates. The research tends to show benefit, right, for that lessening or reduction of GI issues, but it's not across the board. I think this gives appreciation to the complexity of what drives GI issues, or like it's not just, onions that's the problem. There's a whole host of other things that could be coming into the picture.
Exactly. I think it's when we look at this, I kind of keep coming back to this whole healing the gut. I feel like if we're going to go on a low FODMAP diet, that's a Band-Aid, right? It absolutely is. But it's part of the healing the gut. Like when I've this is what I do. I help people with their GI, issues. And I have a course, preventing or eliminating GI distress in endurance athletes. And guess what I do? Yeah, FODMAP diets are talked about, but it's also the stepwise process of how you actually heal your gut, right? So first you actually have to identify your symptoms. And I know that sounds weird sometimes, but do you have IBD, IBS, like what's going on, right? So identify that first, then you need more of a how do I heal my gut plan. It's not like I don't want our listeners just to jump into the ship and say, oh, so I just follow low FODMAP and I'm good. Right. Not necessarily like that. Right. It could work the week before the race. It could get you through that race. But after the race, we want to work with you to help actually heal your gut instead of just kind of putting the Band-Aid on it for you to get through your race.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. But I do like I am so pro FODMAP, right? Because it really helps me as a practitioner figure out where we're going with this whole thing, figure out trigger foods. But again, it's part of the whole process of healing your gut. It's not one thing. But two, I just have to bring up another thing or just reiterate what you said, Dee. I do worry about keeping athletes on this too long because remember, listeners, we're talking about carbohydrates here, right? And you may be like, well, I don't need carbohydrates. It's fine. Well, you do need some carbohydrates. It's just a matter of which ones are going to produce your symptoms or not produce your symptoms. So I do kind of worry about those deficiencies of some micro nutrients, right? Specifically vitamins, minerals, and fiber too, right? Because if now you're taking this out and you got maybe low fiber, now you're affecting bowel movements. Oh my gosh. I mean, it can really, this is why, honestly, why you look at, we've talked about this before, like the whole nutritionist versus dietitian. Like dietitians are clinically trained for these type of conditions, right? This is what we do. Like we spend time in hospitals, we spend time learning this and not to poo-poo nutritionists, but I'm just saying that, this is a very complex issue. GI distress is more complex than you think. It's not just like, oh, hey, I fart sometimes when I race, right? It's not that easy. It's not there. It's not as easy of a fix there, I guess.
Complexity, but this is a tool or a strategy to look at for those of you listening. Like, I've been hearing you talk about GI issues, or I never, like you were saying earlier, Bob, I just took it like that's just how I am. That's just what's going on with me, and don't run behind me because
Yep. Because you'll pay for that one. So if you have not heard of FODMAP before, definitely do a little bit of research in it, or come over to our Patreon account, patreon.com/ISN podcast. Hang out with us, join our free community, interact with us, ask some questions. Like we can totally, we're so honored to have all of you over there and interacting, but we'd love you to pop over there and share your experiences or your questions about FODMAP. If you have heard of FODMAP or you've tried it in the past, we'd love to hear those experiences too. But I guess, one of my takeaways is please just don't think FODMAP is for everybody all the time, right? It should be very methodically placed and used for a good reason. But it should be like the whole goal is to also phase it out, right? Is to figure out what's going on so we can phase it out. And so you have maybe it's a new list of carbohydrate food sources that work better for your system for, the next stage of your life, right? That's kind of the way I see FODMAP is maybe canceling out some of them that produce trigger or are triggers that produce symptoms, some of them that aren't, that actually work really well in your gut, because that's what we're looking for. To be honest with you. And I know personally, I'm sure you do too, Dee. I know which carbohydrate sources trigger me. And sometimes I forget until after I eat them, I'm like, oh yeah, why did I forget that again? Right? But exactly. I think it's valuable, especially as we age, not to drop that in there, but I feel like our digestive system definitely, there are some changes as we age. And I have seen me personally, like I cannot digest certain carbohydrates as well as I was able to a few years ago, right? So I think a lot of things, as we know, the body's very complex. Nutrition is very individual and of one, but that's kind of what I wanted to finish up on with the FODMAP.
And I would just reiterate to if you are looking at implementing a low FODMAP plan, that you do that early on in your training versus waiting till last minute. So that part being very important. Just like we're planning for our training, we're hopefully starting our training a good 6 months in advance of a race or whatever, at least, right, Bob? So
Yeah,
this
exactly.
maybe being a part of it, just to uncover
I mean, it
potential
should be. I mean,
issues.
nutrition, we
Yeah,
periodize nutrition anyway. So this is nutrition. So why, like,
yeah,
in my mind, it's like if you have GI distress, you should be periodizing your nutrition even more so. And FODMAP should be part of that if you do have GI distress. So to me, it's a no
yeah.
brainer. It just goes hand in hand with your training periodization.
We could share over in our Patreon community a couple other links and that couple apps that we recommend
Oh,
over
that'd be a great
there.
idea. Yeah.
So y'all can join our Patreon for free. Patreon.com/ISN podcast is where you can find us. And with that, Bob, we will catch all of you awesome listeners on our next episode. Thank you so much for joining us today.